Zac, welcome to the Weekend Briefing.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Awesome to have you here. You're a man on a mission, which is basically improving men's health, to put it very simply. I want to talk about the mission itself, the problems, the solutions, but I also want to know why you are on that mission. You, Zac Seidler. Go back to your childhood. Tell us what that was like and whether that pushed you on this journey in some way.
I'm the therapist here, Tom. This is a strange seat to be in, but
Flipped it.
I'll deal with it. So going back to my childhood, well, I think that I was always interested in stories. I was curious about why people behaved the way that they did. And a really simple thing that kind of always rose to the surface was the difference between men and women. It was always so interesting to me as a drama kid, as a music kid who was surrounded by women to then go, I considered myself kind of sporty, and I would then go into new spaces and places and watch how people interacted with me and how I interacted with them in a totally different way to how I did when I was in drama class. I was free, I was flexible, I was able to be a different version of myself. And then suddenly I'm posturing and I'm competitive and I've got two older brothers, and in totally different rooms, I would be a different person. And so I was like, surely someone else is experiencing this as well.
Was there a discomfort with that switch?
I learned that type of flexibility was essential to my survival in many ways, which is that I needed to have multiple ways of being, and that has really, become a constant theme in my life and in my research moving forward.
Right. So that difference of the way you felt and behaved in those environments, and I guess, on one side you're talking about more artistic pursuits where there's a lot of women involved, and on the other side you're talking about what, rugby league, wrestling?
Wrestling. I've got a wrestling frame. It was running and soccer type stuff mostly.
Okay.
But it was really, I never kind of felt fully comfortable in either, I think, because I was always in that middle ground. I was like, am I putting on, as a teenager, you're kind of always putting on a mask. You're trying to work out who you are, identity formation is happening. And as I've grown, I've like, I can actually hold both of these in one single body in a way.
And that sparked a deep curiosity within you?
Yeah, I think looking back, whenever I do a podcast, I'm always like, there's one reason that I do what I do. But it was multifaceted. My family, has played a huge essential role in who I am and how I interact. I am one of four, very loud, obnoxious, a competitive family, but I love it, and they help me, cut my teeth in some of this stuff. But also, going to university and being surrounded by, I was like one of very few men in a psychology degree. And so I was like, I want to bring the arts and science together. So that's where my, these two worlds again collided. And I was like, as a guy in this space, no one's really talking about men. No one's really reflecting on masculinity. And so I was surrounded by women and feminism and the idea of how to go about being a good man in this day and age. And it kind of felt like no one was actually providing any type of code book, any type of guidebook about how to go about this. So I started crafting one in my own head, and that blew up, I guess, as I continued in this field into a drive and a passion for a dialogue with men, not about men.
So psychology came first, and then the mission to focus that on men kicked in as you went through those uni years?
Yeah, so I did a gender studies major as well at uni,
Right.
and I was the only straight white male, I think, still to date to have done that. I loved it. I was just surrounded by lots of queer women, lots of people who were like kind of really pushing me and like, why are you here? And I was like, I should probably think about that. And then it became clear that I had a role to play. I had a voice in that. There is, people call me an expert. They go, you've got specialist skills about men's mental health. And I was like, this is not a specialty. This is 51% of the population, 50% of the population.
It's not a niche.
No, it shouldn't be a niche, but the fact that it is the problem, really. Right. So I was like, there's a real space to carve out here. No one's talking about this stuff. And that's kind of where I've always gone, which is like kind of just crafting a narrative around something that is taboo, something that is stigmatized, and being like, I'm going to crack this open and shine a light on it.
So one of the first things you notice in university is that you're one of the only blokes there. What else did you notice that made you think, okay, we're not dealing with men's mental health properly?
Yeah, so I would sit in lectures and we'd talk about gender, and there was a lot of discussion about women because women were the majority of people who show up in psychology practices. Yeah, it's the vast amount of help seeking is with women, and the vast majority of clinicians, like over 80%, are women. So I'm like, all right, we're living in a world which is female dominated. The healthcare space is kind of feminized in many ways.
Within psychology or the whole healthcare
It,
space?
yeah, it's the mental health space specifically
Hmm.
around verbal communication and vulnerability and intimacy being core components of good
Mm.
therapy. That's a stereotypical feminine way of and
Mm.
female way of interacting. Many men do shoulder to shoulder, while women do face to face, and
Yes.
so trying to create that understanding of wait a second, I'm existing in this world where there is not a really clear narrative for how men should be and act, and they're not coming forward, they're not engaging in care. And whenever we talk about men, we talk about them as the problem. We talk about them as something to be fixed. We talk about their ADHD, their violence, their drug use and substance
Mm.
misuse. And we start to overlook with any empathic, lenses, what is it that is underpinning their behavior. And so I was like, just constantly putting up my hand in class, being like, wait a second, as one of the only male voices in the room,
Mm.
how are we doing this? Women sit over here and have this nuanced, diverse, complex inner world, and men are just, monosyllabic monsters in a way. And I was like, I don't buy it.
Did you ever clash with anyone in those classes?
Oh. Um, I like to think that I was respectful, but I just call bullshit on so many things because I was like,
Right.
me and my mates don't do that. I know you haven't interacted with us. And what I wanted to do is shine a light on the fact that behind closed doors, you and I, Tom, are going to talk, in totally different ways. There's going
Different
to be great,
codes, different
exactly.
language.
But there's beauty to it. There's the beauty and the
Mm.
beast, really, of masculinity. And we want to find a way to go, whatever you think is happening is your objective lens on something, and we want to provide the subjective. I want to go, there is actually so many different ways that men show up, and I wanted to go to people in the class and say, you think that men, for instance, they just experience, they've got ADHD, they've got violence, they've got all of these different things that are kind of externalizing,
Mm.
they take it out on the world. And I was like, what do you think is going on internally? Have you taken a moment to just stop and go, what is impelling that young man to act in that way?
I guess what was the situation that many of the women that were seeking therapy were needing it because of the results of those behaviors. And so that was the lens within which male behavior was viewed within, rather than the therapy for the men, and the reasons for that behavior.
For sure. There just wasn't a lot of, you know, there wasn't a lot of silence to just take a moment and go, wait a second, this type of behavior comes from somewhere. It's socialized in certain ways. It is not necessarily what men want to be doing. It's not in line with many of their values, but they continue to do it. And women are bearing the brunt of it. So rather than trying to band aid solve all of this over and over again with women who are coming in as victims and survivors of poor behavior, men behaving badly,
Mm.
instead, maybe we should get to the source of this and go, what are we teaching our boys? How are they going about learning what manhood looks like?
Mm.
And rather than saying, this is broken, this is toxic, which I'm sure we're going to get into in a second, we can instead go, what does life mean for you? What is your purpose? What is your meaning? And this is why so many young men are now leaning into the Petersons, Rogans,
Mm.
Tates of the world, who are going, hey guys, do this, live like this, because the opposite is just this type of everything you touch, kind of blows up.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going on, I guess, in a way, an academic, and
Mm.
you're looking at the industry, seeing problems with it, but you have a parallel personal journey that makes this whole space way deeper and more painful for
Mm.
you. While you're at university, your father dies, takes his own life, and it came as a big surprise from what I've heard you say in previous interviews.
Mm.
What happened to him, and why was it a surprise?
Yeah. I think that it's a surprise because suicide is always a surprise, really. You know, in the grand scheme of things, now that I've treated so many men who are suicidal in my years, there are so many risk factors that we never want to see. There are so many things going on that we kind of turn a blind eye to because you never want to believe that this is possible. But he had been experiencing depression for decades, since he was a teenager, since he was at med school himself. He had these dark, days, months, weeks where he couldn't leave his bedroom. And there was no kind of discussion about that. I could never talk to him about it. And it's really something I think that pushed me even further and further into psychology, because I was like, I need to find ways to connect with men like him who felt failed by the system, who didn't have the words to describe what was going on for him.
Whoa, that's so emotional to think of you as a uni student seeing these problems in kind of a distant meta way, not really knowing what was about to pop up for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And that essentially the same problem that you were seeing in that broader societal sense was going on with the person probably most important in your whole life.
Exactly. It was really frustrating at first, because those final months of his life, there was a lot of discussion. He believed very strongly in like the medical model. He believed that like if he just took certain medications, if he just pushed on, he didn't need to get to the core of what was happening. He didn't need to discuss what was going on. But I continued to be like, we need to find a way to talk. But I just could not get anywhere with him. And I was a baby doctor then. Yeah, I had no
But you were
idea.
seeing it. You were seeing the need to crack him open.
Yeah, I was. But it was really awkward. It was really uncomfortable with him.
But you're both believers in the medical system, him as well. And the
Yeah.
medical system includes the mental health system.
It does. But he was a man of a different generation. He had real shame and stigma around this thing. None of his friends knew that he'd ever experienced depression until they showed up at his funeral. There was no understanding of his years of suffering, and that was a secret that he always wanted to keep, and he made sure. And I remember feeling there were certain moments where I was like, I need to talk to someone about this, and he always kind of suggested that he did not want this to be a marker of his character or who he was. And we're in a totally different time now, and I wish that he was here to see all of the the progress that we've made as a society in going, if you suffer from a mental health issue, it doesn't define you. If anything, it's your superpower in many ways, and that depth of feeling was what made him the best doctor in the world.
So how did you handle it at the funeral? Because I'm guessing that a part of you wanted to get up there and mostly talk about his depression, but it was very clear that that was not how he wanted to be remembered.
No.
So what did you do?
Yeah. I was like non-compos mentis at the time. I just fully, had a breakdown for a week or two there, which is not very long in the grand scheme of things. But if anyone knows me, that was a long time. And I wanted to speak the truth. I remember having a big discussion with my family, being like, we need to address this. We need to talk about it. But those were not his wishes. And so I found a way to have my piece and to say my piece that didn't out him in the grand scheme of things. But my brother's written a book about it now. The story is well and truly out there, and I'm very glad. And I think it takes time. I was, as a young psychologist, I'm like, we're dealing with grief and we're dealing with it now. Everybody talk about it. It's been 3 days. We're done.
They're like, shut up, psychology student.
Literally, they were like, go over there. We don't want to. And that was such a, they always talk about how you need experience in order to kind of, be able to have a true empathic response to severe crisis situations. And my ability to understand how different people grieve, because I have siblings who I thought were very similar to me, and they all had totally different responses to this and continue to. That was an incredible learning for me. I remember as a kid, I would go to funerals and I would shy away. I'd be at the back. I was like, I can't talk to anyone here. This freaks me out. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And the second Dad died, I remember like a couple of months later, one of my friend's grandparents passed away. And I knew exactly how to present, because I'd been through it. I knew what to do. I knew what to say. And that really helped me in my clinical journey as well, moving forward. There's nothing, that is so taboo that you can't just lean into the humanity of the moment.
So you're about 10 or 12 years down the track from that now. You've learned a lot more. You've grown up as a human being, as a man, as a psychologist,
Mm.
as a communicator. Knowing what you now know, is there a way you could have cut through with your dad?
Mm. I think that um, I reflect on this a lot. If I was in my current state, I think I could have, because I'm having far more nuanced, in-depth conversations about this stuff that would have rubbed off on him one way or another. Um, I think that the way that society is going, his greatest fear as a doctor was that he would be stripped of his license. And back in the day, that was what would happen.
Mm.
You know, a decade ago, which is not very long, if a doctor was found to have a mental health issue that was, getting in the way of their practice, they'd be stripped of their license.
And
And that
this
was his whole identity,
and this was a man who was giving his heart and soul to his charitable medical work in
Mm,
King's Cross in Sydney, dealing with some of the most troubled people in our society.
exactly. And that's why I think it really grounded him, because it gave him perspective endlessly to work with, heroin addicts and sex workers and homeless men. He really, I worked there as a 14, 15-year-old on Saturday
Wow.
mornings, and seeing the way that he engaged with others, all of that, I think, colors my experience now and who I am. I had a very privileged upbringing, but he would take me to a place where there was no privilege, and I got to see the way that the world worked and the way that he interacted with people, and
Mm.
that gave me a real respect for and a lack of fear for anyone. If I walk up to a homeless person now, I'm never afraid, because my dad would always get down on one knee and have a chat with them, and that's the worldview, and that's the type of behavior I want to take forward.
That's really interesting to hear you say that going in and working with your dad in King's Cross on a Saturday morning gave you access to a whole different part of society, because you grew up in a relatively privileged area in the eastern
Mm,
suburbs of Sydney in the Jewish community. And I find that interesting because you're now working in a space trying to break down some of these characteristics of Australian men. And I would often attribute those characteristics of the rigid blokiness that doesn't allow them to be vulnerable and work through issues and connect openly, um, with the more regional,
mm,
suburban kind of Australian male, like where I grew up
mm,
in country New South Wales, which was a kind of an old school, blokey sort of town, where there were some of those cultural straitjackets around what a man could be. I was able to have a wide-ranging set of interests like you were. I was kind of the guy that could do the musicals and also play rugby, which
mm,
meant I was comfortable and I got treated very well. But I did feel like you talked about those differences. So, and also another point to add is that Movember has been very good at connecting with these people, just through making it simple, growing
mm,
a moustache and connecting with other blokes, and then through that, reaching out into these other deeper issues they might not normally touch. So I'm interested, for you personally,
mm.
coming into this mission, trying to fix these problems that often are more prevalent and more difficult in these other parts of Australian society. How do you connect with that?
Mm. So two things there. Firstly, what's awesome about Movember is that we're in 21 countries. So
Yeah.
I get to see masculinity writ large. I
It's
get to
huge
see
in
it.
Canada, America,
Yep,
and England, and
yep.
then a bunch of
New
other countries.
Zealand,
Yeah.
Ireland, we're all over the shop. We're going to crack India, because they love a moustache over there,
Yeah.
soon enough. But I think uh, what you get to see, and through my 5 years at the organization, I've been able to see the similarities and the differences between men. And what has happened is that it's kind of broken open that idea that there is, a single way of being, and the fact that a blue collar tradie who lives in regional Australia is going to have such a different worldview to someone who is living in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I think that the underlying core constructs of like traditional masculinity, of being risk taking and self reliant and stoic, they might look different in their behavioral output, but they come from the same place. And so if you run into a investment banker on Bondi Beach, if you dig deep enough, he's got exactly the same ideas of
Really?
how it means to be a man as someone out, in Western Sydney or somewhere else does. It just happens to play out in a different way. But I believe that we are dealing with a very similar issue, regardless of who the guy is, which is this idea of precarious manhood, which is that everyone is running towards goalposts that continue to move. So regardless of who you are and what type of man you are, unless you've managed to get off the treadmill altogether, and I respect those men, I think they're very few and far between, we are running towards this thing. We're trying to get man cards. We're trying to accrue all of this idea of what it means to be a man, but it gets taken away from you very, very quickly without any sense of control. And so I think the thing that you find when you run men's groups, I worked in Darwin for a bit, you get Indigenous guys and you get doctors and you get lawyers and you get all of these different backgrounds in one room. Their base humanity of what it means to be a man and what they were taught growing up can kind of really be stripped away, and you can get to that core. I think we should be looking for similarities rather than difference.
All right, that's a really good answer. Well, you finished your degree. You
I
got-
didn't bring it. I'm sorry, I didn't bring it with me.
I-
But
I
trust
tr-
me.
I trust
I'm
you.
wearing the glasses, so it happened.
You've got, you've
Yeah,
got the
yeah, full
language, you got the words, yeah. I imagine there's a period of grieving which may still be going, but at some point you're able to kick back into your work, possibly with renewed enthusiasm and drive. And then you decide not to just stay in academia. You're still doing some academic work, but you're working for Movember full time, running the Movember Men's Health Institute. Why did you choose that path to make an impact?
So yeah, there was definitely a period of grieving, but my grieving is action grieving, which was like, I'm going to make meaning of this. And I've reflected a lot about this in my own therapy. I've got 4 Holocaust survivor grandparents, and there was no time to stop for them. And I think it's written in my DNA now, which is like, this is horrible. What just happened was extremely traumatic, but I'm not going to sink. I'm not going to break down here, because that's not a legacy for him. That's not a way of showing my love and respect for everything that he gave me. I'm not going to fall over in a heap and just give up. I'm gonna lean into this, and I'm gonna bloody double down.
It's a beautiful, powerful resilience that a lot of Holocaust surviving families have.
It was very much just like, I remember being at Dad's funeral. My grandma, who lost her whole family, we're walking out of the funeral, and she goes, "Look up. The sky's blue." And I was like, now? Right now? It's been 10 minutes. But she's just like, we go on, we move on. And so I didn't stop. None of us did. There wasn't a moment like we, every year on his birthday and the anniversary of his death, we always take a day and just connect with one another and think of him. But we really just lean into not only our work, but our family, and making sure that we are doing what is best for ourselves, and making sure that we are living his values. He was a very hardworking, deeply caring man, and that's all that I want to do. And so what happened from then on was started, did a PhD really focused on men and masculinity and help seeking. Why don't men seek help was kind of why I started. And it became very clear that men do seek help, and I'd known that my dad had sought help, and the system just didn't connect with him. And so I was like, we need to do something differently. And we need to not come from this deficit-based men are broken perspective and actually turn it on its head and go, maybe the system is the issue here. You don't go in as a physio, and say, oh, I can't deal with that knee. I'm so sorry. That knee's that's out of my wheelhouse. But the amount of psychologists who go, this type of male anger or male emotionality or, behavior is just I'm not going to deal with that. That happens far too often. The system has to adapt. The system has to change. And that message really resonated, because it doesn't blame anybody. It goes, this is our collective situation as consumers, as practitioners, as people who run, policy around this stuff. So I didn't want to do ivory tower bullshit, academia. It doesn't interest me. I don't want to do science for the sake of science that no one hears about and collects dust. I wanted to do really high impact, rigorous work, but I needed to make sure that it had practical implications and existed in the real world. That is all Movember wants to do. We're an NGO that started with a funny, humorous idea. It just seemed like a gimmick, and we've raised over $1 billion over 20 years.
Wow.
And now everyone is trying to do something with chest, body, or facial hair one way or another.
It's too much hair.
Yeah, everyone needs to just relax. I only took the job because I can grow a moustache in 3 minutes. But it's a mission that I just like fully align with, which is like having fun, doing good. You know, I don't need to be this serious guy who's, I need to find a way to connect with men on the ground. And the only way to do that is to speak their language.
So you made the choice not to be the best
Mhm.
researcher, but to be the best interface between that researcher and the men that need it and the system that surrounds them.
I don't know about the best, but I'm attempting to do it, which is like, I want to bridge that gap. I want to go research into practice. I want to bring clinical work into practice. I want to make sure that men out there feel seen and heard, and that we are getting their rich lived experience and bringing it to the fore rather than talking at them. We're talking with them.
Okay, so you're about 10 years into that journey, more actually. I
Mm.
guess you start uni at 18, you're now 33?
Yep.
So you're
2? I don't even know.
Who
Somewhere,
Yeah,
yeah.
15 years.
Yeah.
So what have you learned? What is the most important research saying about the problem men are facing today?
Mm. Well, there are base numbers, which is that we're losing 7 men a day to suicide in this country. Yeah, and if you look across the globe, that's a man a minute. And what we find with that is that for each man that dies by suicide, 135 people on average are directly impacted by that. That's what, it's called the ripple effect, but I think it's a tsunami, really. That's why everyone listening is going to have felt this and heard of someone who has taken their life and be affected by it. But what the research really tells me, and the thing that kind of gets me up in the morning, is that firstly, the health system, the formal health system, is not the panacea here. We need social connection. We need informal support. We need friends and family and colleagues to know how to talk to men in the light of day. This is not a dark corner conversation about mental health. We need to be doing this constantly in ways that make sense for guys. And so believing that it is, something that can actually be taught, I think is really important. We can teach young men how to connect with one another, and it doesn't need to be in this type of emotional, sappy way either. They can do it in an action-oriented, goal-focused way. What do you need from me? How can I help? What can I do to lift you up? The problem is that the majority of guys out there are losing friends faster than we would like. They do not prioritize it. They don't connect, and that's what Movember is all about. We've got a whole month. Most charities got a day. We've got a month for like crazy shit. They go, you're running up hills, you're doing all of this incredible stuff. But what it is at its core is about connection, because that is, if you look at any longitudinal survey, if you look at the Harvard happiness survey, yeah, it's not obesity, it's not smoking. These aren't the things that lead to life expectancy, gaps any more than the amount of quality relationships that you have. That is a thing that is going to keep you kicking. And so there's a reason that men are dying far earlier than women. The life expectancy gap is huge, It's 4 to 6 years depending on what country you're in. And we need to find a way that men feel that they are, valued, but also that they have a place. And at the moment, I don't think that we have a society that is finding room for how men can play a really useful role for themselves. Female empowerment is an incredible thing. We've seen huge societal change in the past, couple of decades. And women are benefiting from it, understandably. We're never going to move to a male empowerment movement. That's just not going to happen,
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I wonder if you ever get any backlash for being so focused on helping men when there's such a widespread belief that it's building up women that needs the most focus right at this point in history.
For sure. Depending on the room that I walk into, someone's pissed off.
Right.
It's why are you working on men, or it's why are you not doing more for men? It doesn't matter who it is. And that kind of talks to our political state at the moment.
Because there's some pretty tarnished sort of movements within this space that I imagine you probably share some beliefs with. The men's rights activist movement has a shocking name for its attitudes and, in some cases, misogyny. So how do you navigate that?
That happened really early in my PhD. I remember being like, what do I stand? I need to sit down. I sat down with my supervisors. I'm like, this could go wrong very quickly. And I was on Twitter a lot, and I was like, oh, I like what he said. I like what he said. And then you go and you read his feed, and you're like, oh, shit, I do not like what he said.
Bit,
yeah, exactly. So it's like the first 5 minutes of any conversation with an MRA, tend to go quite well.
Yeah, bro. Yeah,
And
bro.
yeah, awesome. I agree. That's what I think. We need better services. And then
Yeah.
they're like, oh, and women should. Oh, I was like, oh shit. Okay, we're ending this conversation now.
Mm.
So I want to be. I don't want to be a chameleon, but I want to be able to exist in all of those spaces, and that's what Movember wants to do. We want to stay bipartisan in many ways, and what we want to do is have a conversation where you realize that men's health is a whole of societal issue. The failings of not only the health system but society in responding to men's needs is really harming women and children.
Mm.
And so we always say, and this is something that I believe to my core, healthy men, healthy world.
Mm.
If you fix the middle-aged white men in this society, if you can get to the bottom of violence prevention through a male lens, if you can look at male suicide through men's experiences, we will save a lot of pain and suffering for those who are surrounding, caring, living, loving men.
Mm. Okay, so you're talking about the suicide rate there, and men are vastly overrepresented. But essentially, that's I guess the result, the actual problems that get us there. I imagine are much more complex. Two things that are coming up for me here are social connection and men's friendships. The other is the broader societal conversations about men and their behavior. You know, the idea of toxic masculinity. Let's start with the first one, social connection. Your research has found some pretty shocking statistics on men's friendship and what a poor state it's in.
Yeah. We continue to find, you always look at your mates and you're like, wait a second, we all connect with one another every once in a while. What could possibly be going wrong out there? When you survey thousands of guys, especially when they get into their 30s and up, you start to see this complete caving of male friendship. And the reason for that is this socialized belief that they need to be a protector and a provider that kind of kicks in. And so as they start to age, and if they happen to have a family, they move into this role of trying to just control the things within their life. And those connections start to become deprioritized. They're not important to them. They can't actually quantify the impact that it's having on them. And so they go, oh, I don't need that. But when they do see their friends, and I have this with a couple of my mates, I see them every once in a while and they're like, oh, damn, that was so good. I'm like, call me, mate. Call me then.
Yeah.
Remember this.
I live 10 minutes away.
Yeah, exactly. But what we tend to find is that, it's like over 40% of guys had one or no support person that they could connect with in a time of need.
Tell me about this sample. Where was this? This is Australia?
It's a representative sample across 4 different countries. We had 1,000 guys in Australia, 1,000 in the US, 1,000 in Canada, and 1,000 in the UK.
Similar results across the countries?
Yep, really, really similar. They talk about the male friendship crisis in the States, but it is happening in this country. There is no doubt about it. That's where men's sheds kind of came from. But that's focused on men in their, mid-70s to 80s. That's where we're like, oh, the men in their older years need social connection. It's like, no. The suicide rate is rising at a terrifying rate in the 40 to 60-year-old age bracket. It's those middle-aged men who are going, where do I belong? Who am I? What is my authentic self? I don't have anyone to talk to about this stuff because my wife creates all of the social engagements for me. I don't prioritize it. I don't pick up the phone and go, do you want to go for a walk? That just doesn't happen. And that needs to be the norm.
Why don't guys do that? Why don't they drive? Some do, by the way, but
of course,
I make a big effort to personally, but a lot don't. And they just have there's this moment of hesitation when they want to reach out. What is that?
I am personally relentless about this. And the reason I am is because I don't only value it, I think that I'm aware of how essential it is to my own well-being, but I also see the benefits for my friends. And so I've taken on that role. If I wasn't to do that, I think that there would be a silence on my WhatsApp groups.
There's often 1 or 2 people within a big friendship circle that initiate a lot of the social connection.
The reason that they don't, and what we find in the research, is that leaning in to a friendship requires vulnerability. It requires me saying, I need you. And that is at complete odds with the self-reliant, stoic idea of what it means to be a man. And so we can continue to say, oh, we're making waves, we're making progress when it comes to some of this stuff. But really, it's in those nuanced relational spaces where guys need to actually go, wait a second, what is stopping me from sending this text saying, hey, mate, I'd love to have dinner tomorrow night?
Mm.
And when you get down into it, what you find is, I don't want to admit that I need him. And, I Love You, Man, the movie, there's a reason that is like so often quoted and spoken about, because every guy is like, oh, thank God, I got to see this, and it kind of okayed it for a while. But I really hate the idea of like bromance. Why do we need?
Like it's exotic.
Yeah, let's create this hilarious term for something that's just a gimmick, because every once in a while, I'm gonna like, what about like deep-seated bloody love between friends
Yeah.
that I don't need to get pissed in order to tell him how I feel about it? That's where I want to get to.
Well, that's just one of the unhealthy elements of masculinity, about the fear of being seen to be gay.
Exactly. Well,
It's just insane.
masculinity is literally defined by what it is not. Yeah, it's anti-femininity and it's anti-homosexuality.
Yeah.
Masculinity
And
is
it's most unhealthy, yeah.
don't be a woman and don't be gay. It's not what you should do. It's just don't do these things and you'll be okay. But that is like so constraining, because both of those stereotypical ways of being, as a gay or bi man or as a woman, lean into connection, vulnerability, and intimacy, and that's what we need moving forward.
So that touches on the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is the meta narratives about masculinity. And so, let's talk about it. The phrase toxic masculinity is often well-meaning, trying to describe those limitations on masculinity that make it unhealthy, that lead to blockages in social connection and reaching out for help, and the important things that make you mentally healthy. But the phrase itself seems to have become quite damaging.
Oh yeah, I had a really good debate with Chanel Contos about this.
Okay.
If you want to invite her into the room, we can do it live. And I totally understand hers and others' belief that it is a useful term to try to get to the bottom of what is going on the ground. My response is this helping? Yeah, I come from a perspective of, we need to get guys to do something, and the best way to ensure they do nothing is to lecture them, to shame them, and to blame them. That is what the term toxic masculinity does. It comes from a media background. It doesn't come from scientific literature. We've never used it before.
Right.
And it is very clearly what young men are telling us is, when you talk about masculinity now, they say, oh, you mean the silent toxic, in front of masculinity. And what that does is it goes, everything you do in the name of men and masculinities is harmful. That is not how we see masculinity, though. There's a spectrum. There's so many different ways of being. And what you're doing is you're shutting down the conversation. And you're saying, hey guys, actually, you're a 14-year-old boy. The way that you engage as a man with women or others, it's toxic, it's broken, and there's no way out. What it does is it goes, this is the thing that you've been handed. Here are your cards, and you will just have to deal with that. Rather than saying, hey, toxic ways of being are a very prominent form of masculinity. They exist. There's no denying them, but there are other choices here. And so rather than saying toxic masculinity is all there is, we say, here are healthy masculinities. Here are flexible masculinities. Here are ways of connecting with the world that are going to be helpful rather than harmful. And we open up the options rather than saying, this is who you are. This is what's wrong with you. It doesn't allow for any intervention.
It's just such a hard phrase to unpack. It's definitely the wrong word. I just don't think it's actually accurate to the problem, let alone being, unhelpful. But it seems to cast the whole of masculinity as being problematic, to use another somewhat annoying word. That it's somehow fundamentally flawed, rather than some elements of it going too far and then creating a problem.
Exactly. Why can't we have a conversation that talks to the grey? This is what young men, we talk about consent. The reason that young men can't kind of deal with this is because they haven't been brought up in a culture where there is a lot of grey zone, where there is a lot of maybe is the answer, not yes or no. And that's what toxic masculinity continues to go, no, 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 rather than here are some other options. It doesn't allow for a conversation. It says, this is your mode of operation. And we can't continue with that because young men are telling us they literally shut down the conversation. They come into a room, we talk about that, and they go, "No, I'm gone. I don't want anything to do with this."
Yeah, and I think so. Talking about some of the traits like strength and stoicism, which can be really healthy or can be unhealthy if
Women
applied.
use them all the time. They're very, very helpful. They in the right room and at the right environment are going to be something that could be life-saving for you. You're never going to go tell a firefighter, "Hey man, don't be stoic right now as you run in there. Be really vulnerable in the room while there's smoke inhalation going on." No, no, no. Time and place. You come out, you debrief, you discuss what's going on.
But the label toxic implies that the whole trait is a problem, rather than saying the misuse or overuse or underuse of the trait at the expense of other important traits is the problem.
Exactly. Which is why we talk about flexibility.
So,
you
what's
know?
the right label? I think it needs to be a word that implies that some things are going too far
Yeah.
to an unhealthy stage rather than being completely flawed. So, what is the label?
Great. Here we go. Let me just throw another word into the mix to become a part of the problem. I think that what we should be looking at is what are harmful behaviors that are aligned with masculinity. I don't think you should be putting an adjective in front of masculinity.
So, it's not just toxic that's the problem in that phrase, it's
No.
masculinity as well.
Oh yeah, it's putting them together.
Because that makes it about the person and their masculinity, not the behavior.
It's a descriptor for a gender role, which is not something that they created. It was something that is handed to them in complex ways.
So, here's the catchy phrase: harmful behaviors sometimes carried out by men.
That'll sell.
Is that it?
Yeah. That's why you're in marketing.
Is that right? That's a terrible. That will not take off. It's not catchy. But is that it?
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. It's like, when are you doing things that are firstly not in line with your values and secondly going to harm yourself and others? And it just so happens that men are far more likely to enact
To do
those behaviors.
things? Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm glad
We
we've
did
sorted
it.
that
We
out.
did it. Yeah.
So the other big meta-narrative is around male influences. And so Andrew Tate is now the most famous. You're going to tell me it's so passé, and there's other terrible men out there saying terrible things, but they're getting traction. The difficulty is, and I think the detractors, the critics, struggle to do this to their own detriment, is to acknowledge that some of the messages from these people who have very unhealthy messages, some of their messages are healthy.
Exactly. Once again, casting a very broad brush over all of this content is the problem here. If you continue to go to young men, "Hey guys, billions of you are watching this content, you're all idiots," that's a really good way to engage with young men. Rather, you walk into the room, you go, "Hey guys, what are you getting from this? What benefit are you, if you look at David Goggins, for instance, who everyone loves, he doesn't have any misogynistic stuff. He's an ex-Marine. He's really, really full on. He is, largely a discipline influencer.
So he's a good role model?
That's up for debate. And this is where this kind of comes in. There is black and white here. There's a lot of him saying, get out of bed, push yourself, find your purpose, find your meaning, don't take no for an answer. And then it starts to get into, you're a little bitch. Why don't you, you're so weak. And it's like, all right, now you're reinforcing some of these masculine traits. But there are so many men, when I post this stuff anywhere, who attack me, who are like, "Jordan Peterson saved my life. How dare you?" And I believe them. He's got 12 rules for life. The first is get out of bed, make your bed, clarify who you are and what you want to do. There is nothing harmful in this stuff. It's just when you start to really listen in and continue on that journey. And when we talk with young guys, they always say to us, with Andrew Tate specifically, I love his financial stuff. I love hearing about how he has pushed himself to the limit and found a way to be the best version of himself, which, I've watched. You don't want to see my algorithm. It's terrifying. My partner's like, "Oh, you've gone to the dark side." But there's a lot of stuff in there that I'd be like, hell yeah, I'm into this. This aligns with my positive masculinity, the version of myself that I want to create. What these young men say is they go, "Oh yeah, and I just leave the misogyny and homophobia and sexism and racism at the door." And I'm like, how, if you're watching 2.5 hours of this on average a day on TikTok, are you just leaving that behind? And they go, oh, I have these, you get a 15-year-old guy is like, I've got critical analysis skills. And it's like, I don't think that we're aware of the impact of this behavior. So I think my main outcome here of interest is around getting past an alarmist narrative that everything is harmful and everyone is suffering, and how dare these guys speak to our young men, and rather go, why are they seeking out these narratives? What role is it playing in their lives? And how can we enhance their ability to connect with this content and seek out new voices, rather than saying, you're wrong, you're broken? Because every time we do that, they go, all right, I'm going to watch more of him.
So why is it that the most hectic of these influencers are the most popular?
Yeah. You were a young guy once upon a time.
Shock.
Yeah. Transgressive, risk-taking, just pushing the envelope, When I was 14, 15, that's what I wanted to see. That's where, Grand Theft Auto came from. It was, how can I do some crazy shit right now?
Edgy,
Because
yeah.
I wanna feel this. I wanna feel a way of pushing boundaries constantly and finding out what I can get away with. What we need to do is allow that, and this is what I've spoken to you about before, Tom. Why can't we have pro-social male feminist voices who are transgressive? Who stand up and say, I'm going to offer you a way of being, but it's not going to be varnished, and it's not going to be like, oh, let's respect everyone and be really sweet and
But
kind.
one person's varnish is another person's boring,
Yeah.
or is another, everyone has different standards.
You got to have edge.
I don't I don't think you're edgy enough for teenage boys.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to be Andrew Tate.
No.
Thank goodness.
I was working on it. I'm going to shave my head. It was going to happen.
Yeah.
No,
give it
I
up.
completely agree, And
so if you're in your position trying to, I guess, reduce the harmful influences or the harmful influence within an influencer, how do you do it?
we, thankfully, at Movember have a great mechanism here, which is that we go to influencers who seem to have goodness in their approach, but they've got a huge audience of young men, and we go, hey, can we work with you? Can we find ways to actually teach you about our work, to teach you about what we do? And
Someone
can you,
edgy? Someone actually dangerous?
No, they're actually edgy. Then they're definitely not as edgy as Tate, because that is just way too much reputational damage. But they've got millions of young men that they talk to, and we go, hey, can you thread in some mental health stuff? Because mental health stuff is not, Andrew Tate loves, and as does Elon Musk. The other day, he was like, I put on my gravestone, never went to therapy. And I was like, we know, don't worry, it's clear. But the majority of young guys now, even many of these influencers, are like, they know that the mental health narrative, the anxiety narrative kind of, gets young men going. So we just need to find a way to connect with those guys and kind of upskill them so that they can, and we don't change their content. We just go, here is some stuff that maybe you can thread through.
So, are you really reaching out to some of the transgressive, kind of intense, fairly hectic influencers? And are they picking up the phone, or are they telling you to F off?
No. Well, that's the thing about Movember, is that we are, for men by men, and so we can enter rooms that many other places can't. And so whenever we talk to government, and they're like, how do we approach this problem? I'm like, you're not going to do anything. Leave it to us.
Stop it.
Yeah, stop. Like, the Labour government in the UK has been like, we're going to pay, however much money to create new young male influencers. It's like, if this has a government badge on anything, you're dead in the water immediately. And really, if it has a Movember badge on it as well, it's not going to fly. It needs to be organic, and it needs to be created, with a very clear narrative.
But are these guys really saying, oh, thanks for the phone call, Movember, I'll come and sit down and be lectured by you?
They come and we do co-creation. That's really what it comes down to. We haven't gone as far into the risky, edgy side that I'd like to, and hopefully moving forward we're going to be able to do that. But we co-fund them. We find ways to actually analyze the data and evaluate their impact as well. Like, we take this very seriously.
I can't get the image of you going to Transylvania or wherever Andrew Tate's holed up, waiting for his court case.
Yeah.
Standing outside the door and ringing the doorbell. Him asking you to bring a box of chocolates, or is that
Exactly.
how it
Yeah, yeah.
works?
It's really sweet. We hug, and it goes really well. Yeah.
All right. How do we wrap this up? We've hit so many areas. It's been great to learn about you and what's driven you, and how deep all of this cuts for you, and also just the fact you were already on this journey before the tragedy in your family, and how
Mm,
the confluence of those two things seems like this is where you're meant to be as a person
mm.
and a professional. Um, what about this? What do you want to see in the next 5 years change? What will be the real focus?
Yeah. Um, what I really want to work on is something called the perception gap, which is there is a really clear gap between the way that men see themselves and their values and the way that they think society views men and masculinity. So when you ask a young guy, hey, do you think that being a gay guy means you're less of a man? A vast minority of them are going to say, yeah, I agree with that. But then when you ask them, hey, what do you think society says about this when it comes to men? You see a massive gap where you've got like 13, 14% of them going, this is what society tells me. This is where you get the locker room mentality, where you get a group of guys sitting around, someone says a misogynistic or homophobic joke, and no one in the room says anything, but 9 out of 10 of them are like, I'm not okay with this. I'm not comfortable with it. What
Pack mentality, pack behavior.
because they're terrified of ostracism.
Yeah.
They're terrified of not belonging. What I want to do is get young guys to understand that there is great belonging in knowing that your internal values are probably very similar to the man next to you. And if we just break that silence, you can work out that what society is telling you is actually bullshit. And your belief system about who you are and what you believe in is that's the key. That's the thing that is going to get you moving forward and succeeding in life.
We're always prone to feel like we're an outlier. That's how humans work, probably because of that fear of ostracization.
Yeah. And no one is talking about men's fear of loneliness and the loneliness epidemic. We hear about this all the time, but men are extremely lonely. They feel disconnected from society. They don't feel heard. They don't feel seen. My aim is to provide them with an opportunity to connect with one another in a meaningful way.
Well, I think what's great about what Movember does is the way it partners with sporting clubs and other groups that already exist, because men often connect best over something.
Exactly.
It's a stereotype, but it's more common for women to have a direct emotional connection, where often men bond through spending time doing stuff together rather than opening up. And Movember just partners with these groups that already exist because people are into their motorbikes or their sport or moustaches or whatever.
Exactly. And we don't need to only go to stereotypical spaces and places, but we've got a great partnership with the AFL. We've got, Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, which is this motorbike ride that has funded our work for a very long time. We just want to understand, and this is now why we're going online, and we're going to where young men are. We're going to be doing gaming stuff. We're going to be doing manosphere stuff. We're going to be doing all of this work that really connects with the lived experience of guys out there. And Movember's aim is really to understand, to seek to connect with, and then to improve, men's lives. And as a result, kind of, help make sure that families and societies and communities all benefit.
Amazing. Great to speak to you, Zac. Thanks so much for sharing your personal story. And I guess a lot of these ideas are informed by research, so your insights there are so valuable as well. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
Nice. Hey, that was another episode of the Weekend Briefing. I really hope you liked it. If you did, please like this video, drop us a comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more of these big interviews with the humans behind the headlines.